Hello everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. There's a lot to talk about the latest news around the world. It seems like too much going wrong simultaneously. Wars, climate disasters, hunger, shrinking freshwater resources, energy crisis, political instability, social polarization, rising Islamophobia as well, and then high inflation and economies in recession. It feels like everything is caving in and the end is near. Indeed, every story has a beginning, middle, and the end. From human ecology's perspective, the evidence today is overwhelming that humankind cannot continue on the path on which it is now heading into the future. Rapid global economic expansion that began in the 20th century would almost certainly end and reverse itself in this century, due largely to resource depletion and pollution. So I developed this proposal, my thesis, for those who are given a chance to continue in this world. Because we Muslims are prohibited to forecast the hour, the Sa'ah. The Prophet ﷺ himself in the hadith meeting with the angel Jibril, other than enumerating the signs of the end times, he said, about the hour, he who is questioned knows no more than the questioner. I also believe, like Sayyid Hussein Nasr once said, the very structure of the Islamic tradition, with its emphasis upon the direct link between man and God and the lack of a central religious authority, contains the maximum protections for survival of this faith in a world such as of today. For sure, there are legitimate reasons for many among the Muslim societies who argue that the world is ending, because everything seems like a trailer of end times. And along this line, my works offer a cyclical view of time, rather than viewing human history as a straight line of movement, as what underlies utopianism of the modernization, whereby things simply must become better every day, only because time moves on. In an academic discussion such as this, the cyclical view of human history might be best illustrated by the sigmoid curve. We at the moment could be on a transition period from one civilization to another. This curve explains so many of our present situation. It's a curve that has intrigued people since time began. It sums up the story of rise and fall, the story of all empires, the story of a product's life cycle, always. So it might as well the story of our modern civilization. We wax and then we wane. We start slowly, experimentally, and falteringly. In the cyclical view of time, there is life beyond this curve. The secret to continue is to start a new curve before the first one peters out. The right place to start the second curve is at point A, where there is the time as well as the resources and the energy to get the new curve through its initial exploration and floundering before the first curve began to dip downward. This curve also explains our present confusion, because understandably people might think, why would anyone think about the words at the turning point when everything seems fine? In light of the digital revolutions we are in now, for instance, with smartphones, tablets, app stores and with almost unlimited possibilities from big data, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and so on. At point A, everything seems fine. People only realize the problem when looking the disaster in the face. Besides, we should never forget that economic is a component of and is dependent upon the natural world, the environment where it resides, and of which it is a part. Now, there is total panic in Europe. Some claim that the region faces rapid deindustrialization. The entire economic system is crashing into an unprecedented recession, particularly in UK. Others say to calm down that the crisis is just a blip in the transition to renewable energies. Sadly, it might be just a beginning of what have long been predicted in environmental studies, and things might get worse instead. So the best we can do now is to minimize losses with adaptation. In fact, scholars on environmental studies are not in the least surprised by what's happening. Warnings about the combined social and ecological crisis have been around for decades and even occupied a central place within the area on climate change and peak oil studies. The crisis has been expected to come about. They just never thought this would happen this soon. The COVID-19 pandemic and war between Russia and NATO taking place in Ukraine have expedited it, exposing our weaknesses and exposing the hypocrisies of the West, the global North, and the wealthy nations combined, towards both social and environmental justice. Drawing upon pragmatic strategies to save as much as we can of civilization and as many people as we can, my presentation today would like to introduce to the Muslim majority societies the bottom-up relocalization practices, social experiments, as demonstrated by the Transition Town Network and Global Eco-Village Network. The community movement in question, Transition Town Network and Global Eco-Village Network, contend with the mounting evidence that climate change and the converging social, ecological challenges could bring us down to energy crisis, food crisis, natural disasters, and eventually the decline or collapse of modern civilization as we know it. Wary of waiting for top-down solutions, these people in the developed world took the initiatives and launched transformative process in their own neighborhood or in some kind of intentional communities to lead the way towards what is conceived as revolutionary transformations. Relocalization. This term is often used to describe a movement towards an opposite direction from globalization and centralization, which ironically have been championed by the powerful and wealthy nations. The movements often aim to achieve this by turning to the local economy, putting the means of production under social control instead of market forces and profit, and having human-scale self-governance. Here's the link to the Transition Town Network. It was founded in 2008 by Rob Hopkins in UK. There are now estimated to be between 2,000 to 3,000 communities in over 50 countries involved in the transition initiatives. And here's the link to the Global Eco-Village Network. It is a global association of eco-villages founded in 1991 by Hilder and Ross Jackson. Global Eco-Village Network connects approximately 10,000 communities and related projects in 116 countries. In the context of Muslim-majority countries, I shall like to highlight the significance of radicality and like-mindedness in such an arduous undertaking. And these are what the movement's doing for building the community's resilience and prepare for the worst. Basically, these are new initiatives and social experiments that could help society adapt to a post-growth regime, a post-economic growth regime. These include alternative economic arrangements such as the sharing economy or solidarity economy. Interestingly, despite the challenges, these community builders hold positive and uplifting visions of more friendly post-fossil fuel future. They even seek to demonstrate that future with less oil, with less fossil fuels, could be more preferable to present. They provide insights into pragmatic and strategic issues involved in transition from unsustainable present to more sustainable forms of production, exchange, and consumption. Accordingly, here in my works, I'm promoting degrowth and green economic paradigms for Muslim-majority societies. And that means I'm asserting that serious efforts need to be made to build the mental and emotional resilience in this transition period. And right here, I wanted to explore the potentials of Islamic life work to effectively communicate about the ecological emergency and the needed paradigm shift to the adherents of Islam. Degrowth, transition, resilience, relocalization, these fit quite naturally with the perspective that I'm advocating about the world's at a turning point. I'd like to draw your attention to this. Until these new paradigms become mainstream, putting these into practice does require a liberation from the dominant paradigm. Here is the significance of radicality, like-mindedness, and the chance of going against the unity of our nation, because everyone else, in Indonesia for instance, are on the mainstream, clinging to the dominant paradigm. Environmental studies have talked about the Anthropocene, an epoch where the human impact on Earth is profoundly threatening its own existence. They have been thrashed out in tons of journal articles and books. The long-term consequences of land degradation, health consequences of environmental degradations, the loss of arable land to urban development, questions about the ability of science to continue to raise agricultural productivity, and hence the need of a stable population. Thus, the need to decelerate the population growth, the escalation of toxic waste and pollution to the environment, the potentially catastrophic consequences of climate change. I just like to remind everyone that we live in the fossil fuel civilization. Fossil fuels, which our modern world depends so much upon, has only been around in the last 450 years and may soon finish. So just like a spike across the million years of world history, it could be the most negligible era. And the twin challenges had been expected to come about. First is the permanent shortfall of the fossil fuel supply due to depleted oil reserves, and secondly, too much CO2 carbon dioxide from the fossil fuel combustion. CO2 is a heat-trapping gas, a greenhouse gas, and too much of this in the atmosphere causes global warming that disrupts the climate pattern. Problems caused by the warming have arisen already and keep arising. Flooding, heat waves, drought, sea level rise, and so on. In fact, these are more serious than terrorism or religious extremism. My works in human ecology studies are particularly concerned with the fate of Muslim-majority societies in this state of affairs. I wish that my work would put forward some insights into an alternative approach to collaborate religious communities into some global environmental actions whereby the non-nationalist, non-secularist communities are able to participate by capitalizing on the genuinely Islamic life world. Here is my research philosophy, critique of modernity. As everyone's probably aware, one of the most important contributions of environmentalism to the moral and political discourse of our time is its critique of modernity. Much of the whole mess we are facing today is caused by modernity, which has been successful in corrupting all natural systems that support life. So the time has come to rethink modernity. In fact, for these four critics, it's too long overdue. Other than environmentalism, there are critics of modernity internal to the West itself, such as Heidegger, the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, Foucault, Gadamer, and others. Also, critiques of modernity is an essential concomitant of decolonizing knowledge debates. In the Muslim world's context in particular, you might be aware of Muslims' reconstruction project initiated by Islamic philosophers such as Said Hussein Nasr, Ismail al-Faruqi, Said Naqib al-Attas, Ziauddin Sardar. These thinkers have been concerned first with the modernist's rupture with transcendence, and consequently the implications of the cognitive transformations underlying modernity for the Muslim's mind. I made two contributions to this debate, Muslims' Reconstructions of Knowledge project. As we can expect, the differing opinions between supporters and critics of modernity started from different lenses of the philosophical inquiry that each one based on. Therefore, as I said at the beginning, due to my philosophy and the cyclical view of time, I could easily come to terms with scientists who claim that modern civilization and its global society are right on track for a global collapse. My thesis contends that the world has come full circle and is now at a turning point. In fact, the crisis unfolding around the world has already changed the conversation around modernization, development, and progress. The dominant paradigm is starting to reverse course. The overlapping crisis is going to flip the script. We will not proceed to discuss geopolitics on the basis of what states are backwards and those that are not. Against this background, my work reveals several important areas to consider in developing the civilizing missions of Islam in the Anthropocene. In a nutshell, It's to get rid of the unnecessary and in fact un-Islamic burdens of nationalism and all other worldly ideologies. It is high time that Muslims should begin to reconstruct the Tawhidi worldview as an integrative framework for science, faith, and ethics within the Islamic sensibility, and to redefine the criteria of the genuinely Islamic good life. We need major reform of rationality and rediscover moral forces of this religion. In developing a thesis or dissertations, you have to pick a side and stick with it. I decided to support the devout Muslims, the God-fearing people, against the secularists and nationalists who became the dominant group and the ruling class in Indonesia. The devout, who are not nationalists nor secularists, are the minorities. Here I concur with Daniel Pringle, who arrived at the conclusion that while Muslim in Indonesia is the majority of the population, 87% in 2021, last year, but Muslims who are not nationalists nor secularists and who vote for an Islamic political party have always been a minority of the Indonesian population and remain so nowadays, despite the increase in Islamic religious observance. Post-colonial theory helps to make sense of the marginalization of this group throughout the Indonesia's colonial and independence history. In fact, as we all know, there are obviously Western social and political control, as well as Western cultural penetrations in the Muslim world. My other article shows the way nationalism voiced its unity onto diversity that fits nicely the secularization premise is tantamount to the state's oppression to national minorities. Through the lens of post-colonial theory and secularization theory, the conservative or devout Muslims appears to have been largely intimidated and forced to become moderate and adaptive to Western secular life, be reformed and privatized altogether. So here's the thing. This minority group needs to be liberated, to be allowed to being devout. There's a wrong conception, originated from the secularization theory, that being conservative and devout is always synonymous with being oppressed. An important finding from my research is that this, what I call in my thesis, community Muslims, quote unquote, have more potentials to engage in community-led initiatives like the Transition Network and Global Eco-Village Network compared to the non-community Muslims. I'd like to highlight once again, while the secularists and the liberals are in full agreement in championing liberalism, that different people give different meaning to religion, they cannot equally accept that different people give different meaning to secular life. And here's where my thesis strikes the right chord with this conference foci on religious pluralism, civil freedom, and economic progress. My research has a pragmatic orientation. So here in this forum, I'm trying to persuade Muslim intellectuals to mainstream these new paradigms: degrowth, ecological economics, transition, resilience in Muslim majority societies. Whether we like it or not, We are being forced to enter into a transition from a modern industrial worldview to an ecological one, from fossil fuel civilization to an uncharted territory fraught with uncertainty. So I assert it is time for Muslim intellectuals to get themselves up to speed about the changes and begin to disengage with the outmoded dominant Western worldviews. That's also where I see my thesis pertinent to this conference. Additionally, besides decolonizing knowledge and postcolonial theory as conceptual frameworks, my works were guided more broadly by the debate on Islam and ecology, and more specifically, the contestation between Max Weber's disenchantment and Zauberung and Said Hussein Nasr's re-enchantment. So these two are pertinent to the conference theme. Along this line, my work intends to reverse the secularization premise, secularization trajectory held as the dominant paradigm in Muslim-majority countries. As I said earlier, Muslims need to be liberated to freely choose to being devout. We have to remember the importance of religious communities as a fail-safe for a wide range of trouble. Faith in God helps people to remain strong during troubled times. Religions are proven to have provided comfort and sense of security throughout the history of human civilization. Moreover, humans by nature are meaning-seeking creatures. We are motivated by both the need to understand the world in which we live and the yearning to search for something of value and significance that makes life worth living in the midst of suffering. Regretfully, due to the hegemonic nature of Western science and knowledge system and the dominance of secularization theory, these very simple notions have been forgotten and need to be reminded, re-emphasized, even in Muslim-majority societies, as I will show in the following slides of what I found in Indonesia. Please note, Indonesia is known to be the world's largest Muslim nation. Intra-Muslim conflict. The conflicts of Muslims against fellow Muslims are getting intensified with social media. Indonesians are now witnessing how they bicker over every issue on every single day. The Global War on Terror project has stipulated the notions of good Islam against bad Islam. So those who receive acknowledgement and certification from the state are the official Islam, the good Islam. So naturally, when a state acknowledges one form of Islam, other expressions of Islam are allowed to be persecuted. In November 2018, for instance, individuals wearing Banser uniforms, Banser is the Nahdlatul Ulama's youth wing, were seen taking out a black flag bearing the Islamic Creed Tawhid printed in Arabic during a rally and set the flag on fire. They believe the action symbolized their opposition to Hizb ut-Tahrir. Dozens of other people wearing the same uniform were watching over the burning. When the fire started engulfing the flag, members started singing the Banser marching song with very much nationalist overtone. And then Islamophobia in cyberspace, online harassment with the use of visual images, cruel caricaturing, videos, chat rooms, tags, and social media, which are intended to ridicule Islam and Islamic traditions and anything Arabs, are taking place in Indonesia. Additionally, what might be interesting, The frantic de-radicalization project, which in my view has disproportionately dominated the administration, management, and politics of the current president of Indonesia from 2014, at the cost of other more critical and pressing issues such as climate change, was, in my hypothesis, a malicious manipulation. By whom? By the lingering colonial power, the neo-colonial, to create a veil of unconsciousness about the enormous problem at hand. As anthropologist Thomas Rauter once suggested, that such evil manipulation is very possible in the exploited nations or developing world. While the exploitation continued on the one hand, nationalism stands out as the root of many problems being studied. So it's the key or independent variable in my research, as it continues to be the underlying of any regnant ideologies. Why? Actually, nationalism might not be as much a problem until it's wedded to the development ideology, which has been synonymous with economic growth paradigm, which appear to have done everything by extracting the country's natural resources, which they have simply found, not made, to rival the West, the global North, and to become one of the high-income and developed nations. That, of course, came with its attendant notions of neoliberal market economy, consumerism, and the necessary corollary of this was a positivistic belief in science. Having been bolstered up by these, nationalism turned out to be like a monster, actually, wicked and cruel. And because the education curriculum was designed to fulfill the state's need and aimed at training citizens to have national identity, this set of ideologies by all means impregnate the education curriculum. As I was advocating to empower the devout Muslim communities, including the Islamists, because I don't think it's the right time to discriminate the so-called radicals from the moderate, and to build their capacity with the required skills and knowledge to cope with the challenges, from the literature on relocalization and transition movement, I came up with the following research problem. There are knowledge and capacity gaps that exist between grassroots communities in the developed world and the devout Muslims in the global South. As I said earlier, I contend that it's a due season for Muslim scholars to end the adulation to the superior West associated with ideals of progress, growth, rationality, and liberalism. What I found on the ground in developing countries like Indonesia, sadly, was far from that reality. Economic progress continues to fit into familiar narrative of modern, juxtaposed to anything Islamic as pre-modern, backward, primitive, despotic, static, undemocratic, rigid. The dominance of liberal Muslim scholars and their support of neoliberalism was also obvious. In a similar vein, it is relevant to note that much of the international community continues to laud Indonesian Muslims as among the most moderate and inclusive in the world. The politics of Indonesia is touted as among the world's largest democracy and was once even modeled for post-Mubarak Egypt. Against this background, my doctoral research in sociology set out to address the provocative insight of scholar on environmental studies, James Radcliffe, who said, the non-Western religious societies, in fact, do not reveal any less destructive trends and are not less industrial attracted than the West. So my research question then, What are the challenges to the communications of the ecological issues, ecological emergency to the Muslims, nationalists, secularists, and the devout living in the global south, characterized by an emerging market economy? Finally, there are two ways I was hoping the readers would appreciate my works. One, if the present negative trends could not be reversed, and there's no way Muslims can solve the problem, and they just have to go with the flow, then my thesis, including this article from this presentation, is going to serve merely as a memoir in Muslim-majority societies, right before the world's collapsing. Or, if there were a way for a new civilization to emerge, my research can be used as a vehicle to develop praxis. First, by introducing relocalization initiatives to the Muslim-majority societies, and then restoring Tawhidi worldview, cyclical view of time, including sigmoid curve, to see the world with new eyes, and to capitalizing on Islamic livelihood to face the world fraught with uncertainty. And here are the three arduous tasks that I was looking at the Islamic life world. First is to better communicate these situations to the devout Muslim societies in particular, and then to redefine the genuinely Islamic good life and to fashion solidarity economics. What is the life world? Life world is an area of interest in phenomenology. Edmund Husserl is who first introduced the concept. In brief, life world is the world of everyday life in which we act and react without being engaged in scientific research. So life world is subjective and therefore can be cultural. Accordingly, life world can be sharply distinguished from the objective world of sciences. I had an opinion from the impression I got from the people around me. Islam appears to persist as a powerful reference point for so many believers. Thereby, in this sense, Islam is a life world for so many believers. That's where I began with in developing the theoretical framework in my PhD thesis in sociology. 3 years later, after I finished my PhD in 2016, Professor of Sociology at the University of Pittsburgh, Mohammed Bamye, published a book, Life Word of Islam, The Pragmatics of a Religion. His thoughts resonate very well with mine. In fact, it fits precisely to my sociological characterization of Islam as a symbolic universe, which in my further analysis accounts for the development on cognitive and pragmatic realms of Islam as a public philosophy, Islam as a social movement, and Islam as a global order. The significance of lifehood is presented in my article, with the UN's initiative Faith for Earth as an example. Having been assumed for so long that there will be no further need for religion, the United Nations in all of a sudden flipped the script on the secularization trajectory, in the way I see it. In November 2017, it decided to engage with faith-based organizations as strategic partners in protecting the environment towards achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The UN Environment Programme, UNEP, launched the Faith for Earth initiatives, a multi-faith working group. In 2022, this year, from February to March, Faith for Earth Dialogue was held in Nairobi, Kenya. In my article, I laid out an argument why I didn't see the UN's leadership would be adequate in capitalizing on religious livelihoods, particularly in case of Islam, whose colonial and post-colonial contexts have not been sufficiently represented in the enterprise. So that leads me to the end of my presentation. In conclusion, let me sum up my main point. I have emphasized in my works, in the PhD and this longitudinal research, a global network of relocalization by local Muslim communities within minimal or night watchman states, the definition of which has been provided, that stands shoulder to shoulder with Transition Network, Global Eco-Village Network, and other relocalization communities. At the end of the day, the real place where the real work is done has always been within the intra-faith rather than interfaith domains. So my thesis has gone some way towards enhancing an understanding of the need to capitalize on Islamic life work endogenously, in which the causes, goals, ideas, and motivations are originating from within rather than without the Muslim communities themselves. Thank you all very much.
ليس السلوك عن الهوى من دينه. الله 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 يا مولانا. الله 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 لا إله إلا الله. قسما بمن ذكر العقيم من أجله. قسما المحب بحبه ويمينه. الله 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 يا مولانا. الله 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 لا إله إلا الله. ما لي سواكم غير أني تائب عن فاترات الحب أو تلوينه. ما لي سواكم غير أني تائب عن فاترات الحب أو تلوينه. الله 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 يا مولانا. الله 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 لا إله إلا الله. الله 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 يا مولانا. الله 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 لا إله إلا الله. من إذا هتف الحمام بألكته أبدا أحن لشجوه وشذوره. الله 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 يا مولانا. الله 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 لا إله إلا الله. وإذا البكاء بغير